Okay. So we are going to look at chapter 2 today, and then 3 and 4 are on Wednesday. We have that first case study, and then next week we're going to be talking about your specific projects and looking at what you might consider doing. As we said last time, groups can be allowed if the scope is such that you can divide out content areas that are specifically your own, because I need to see independent work for each of you. But if it's a big enough system and you're kind of dividing elements of it out, that would be acceptable. Otherwise, it's expected that it would be alone. If you still have like no clue, please talk to me before next Monday, because when you come in, I'm expecting us to be able to go through your ideas, talk about scope and deliverables, to start crafting what that project might look like, to make sure that you have still the majority of the semester to be able to work on it. There'll be milestones along the way to try to keep it from being something that you procrastinate. I know some of you are actively in senior design, and that takes up a lot of your time and attention. So I've provided milestones to hopefully help keep you on track and not feel like you're getting to April and everything is due in every class simultaneously, because that's not a great feeling. So just if you are having questions about the project idea of like, would this work? Feel free to send me an email or feel free to reach out and meet with me. I've got office hours right after this class. If you want to use time between now and when you go to Kicklighters or some other class, please feel free. So, okay. So one of the things that is a key point in Six Sigma conversations, and this is actually talking a little bit partly about why we have the Lean Six Sigma combination, is that there are some limitations when we think about Six Sigma organizations. We always want to be customer focused. And so if you're thinking about customer focus, the people that most directly connect to that are frontline workers. So while top management might be making strategies, the actual frontline people, they're the ones who are actually building the components. Or if you think about going to Jimmy John's, you know, the corporate Jimmy John's might be sitting in a plush conference room having high level discussions about how to love their customers, but that doesn't make the St. Joe's Jimmy John's make your sandwich any faster. They are unbelievably slow. They are directly impacting the customer. Or if you have an issue with an Amazon order and you go into their chatbot, the fact that it is 24/7, 365 doesn't change the fact that it's got limited responses and can't actually address your needs, right? So when we're thinking about customers and being customer focused, you can't take away the fact that a lot of the lowest paid, lowest on the totem pole individuals are the people that have the most contact with the customers. And so when we think about being customer oriented, a lot of the processes and a lot of the strategies need to be happening with the frontline workers. Now, what is a potential pitfall of that?
Management's not there to like back up things because they're not involved. You're not talking with them every week. You're talking with the operators to see what you're doing.
Exactly. So the disconnect between management, the operators, top management, middle management, the operators, the customers, those disconnects in communication are the biggest pitfalls of having lasting change, of having actual implementation, which was on your quiz, talking about what has to change first. When we talk about way of thinking, we're not talking about one person's way of thinking, we're talking about everyone's way of thinking. Because if the people who are interacting with the customers aren't thinking that way, it doesn't matter what's happening. So my youngest kid works for Dr. Amy Chan Hilton. And if you know anything about Dr. Chan Hilton, she's a civil engineer by trade. She originated in the engineering department. She's actually considered engineering department faculty because she's a full professor. Um, but her responsibilities are basically administrative, except for teaching one section of UNIV 101 every year. And so otherwise, she's completely administrative. And one of her offices includes the grants office. The person who is actually in charge of that flow is a person named Rebecca Deeg. And Rebecca Deeg has a helper who is my child. My child is the one who is emailing faculty members all the time when they submit incomplete grant documents, which is really funny because my kid gets emails responding to Dr. Ely all the time because they assume that it's coming from a person, not like from an adult. And so they just title, even though she signs it Bunny, they replied Dr. Ely, which there is one at this institution. It's just me, not her. So it's kind of funny. The actual daily interaction is happening with a 17-year-old who's a math education major. The decision making on how everything's happening is with a fully tenured, full professor, very high level administrator. After the interview, my daughter has talked to Amy maybe 2 more times since she started working for her last year. That means that there's a big disconnect between how Dr. Chan Hilton is strategically looking at flow and what day-to-day operations and interactions between customers is going to look like. And that happens everywhere. So when you're thinking about your projects, you might need buy-in from senior level management or the highest process owner, but the implementation strategically has to be thought about from the point of view of the person who's interacting with the customer. So when you're thinking about your projects, whatever that project may be, you need to be thinking who interacts with the customer. Who's that face person or phone person or email person? Who are they connecting directly with? Because those are the people who actually come down to that interaction of whether or not you're doing it successfully. So some of the differences, and this table is in your book. I do want you to review the full table, but I wanted to hit on a couple things here because a couple of these things should sound very familiar to the Toyota way, which you might have covered with Dr. Lara Gracia or Dr. McDonald. But one of the things is we think about long-term focus. It's not reactionary management. And if we're looking at manufacturing settings or healthcare settings or education settings, I've never worked a single place that wasn't reactionary. People are too busy because every organization is short staffed. And I hate this. They use the word lean, and they mean the word lean as in thin, not as in a lean system. So you hear organizations saying, well, we're really lean. They don't actually mean that they use lean techniques. It means that they don't have enough people. And so this idea of having prevention-based management or reactionary management is really an issue of staffing. When you have places that are chronically short-staffed, you are always reaction. How many people feel like every day their job is just moving to the crisis of the moment, or that's how their bosses work? Maybe they're just moving to the crisis of the moment. So that's one of the big factors that we need to think about, because if we're going to talk about serious commitment from upper management, adequate staffing might be one of the things that you address. And people don't like you to add personnel. They think you should be able to, if you're doing lean management, you should be able to remove personnel. Well, sometimes you can't. Sometimes you can balance. Dylan Egan did a project at Gibbs where they were installing robots to do a certain task. Those individuals that had been doing the task previously were not fired. They were moved to another location that couldn't be automated, which actually helped them to increase production because a robot replaced a person, but they kept that person. So they actually increase the amount of effective labor by automating certain tasks and not firing the people who had been doing them. But there's a lot of misinformation. Oh, you're automating that task. Are you letting all those people go? Like, no, they were short staffed. They needed to move that labor. Because if you know anything about the labor market right now, there's a lot more people that are looking for employees than there are people looking for jobs. And so a lot of businesses are short staffed right now. Measures of performance. So traditionally, it's just bottom line. Are we profitable? Customer driven, we're going to look at customer satisfaction, and today we'll talk a few ways of looking at that. Percent market share. This is actually more important than just bottom line. Do you have growth? Do you have a pipeline? Or are you going to, if your product becomes phased out because of new technology, is there anything to back that up? Or does your company just die? If a new competitor came out, do you have a competitive advantage? Or are you hanging on by the skin of your teeth? Those types of questions relate to market share, not bottom line, which again, to increase market share, that's investment, that's product development, that's research and development, that's marketing research to find out what people need and how to better your product. We'll talk more about that today as well. Quality orientation and looking at total productivity. This is probably one of the least executed things that I see in organizations when I go consulting. Productivity is still very siloed. So maintenance tracks maintenance, operations tracks operations, marketing tracks marketing. It's all very, very siloed. They don't ever put it in to say, what is our total productivity? What do we see as an organization? Because the reason that that's an issue, actually, let me stop talking. What's the reason that that's an issue? Josh, give me an idea. Right, they don't work well across departments. And other Josh, is maintenance completely separate from operations? No. So you're measuring things discretely as if they're in little silos, but they're not actually siloed. They're all interconnected, which means sometimes you're going to do something that removes labor hours from maintenance and adds them to operations. For example, if you train your operators to do certain types of maintenance actions on their own without having to call a maintenance tech or a setup guy, you have alleviated work from one place and put it to another place. But what have you also done? Tyler, what have you also done? If you no longer need maintenance to come and do this and the operator can do it, what waste have you eliminated?
Communication between the two to call someone from that, do what they probably is in their job description.
Which is exactly right. What would I call that? Calling waiting, waiting for someone, right? Waiting is a classic waste. So when I have to call someone else to have them come do something for me instead of me doing it myself, I'm having to wait, right? So if some of the setup work can be moved from maintenance or some of the changeover work can be moved from maintenance to an operator, operations may slow down, but the total productivity increased because the job was being done. That's a one for one. That's just moving it to a different place. That's still being done. What we've eliminated is the waiting time, waiting for maintenance to come. But if I'm only over operations and I don't care about maintenance's numbers, my productivity just went down. Maintenance's just went up. They just got more labor hours. They can do more jobs. They can increase the number of jobs they've been doing because we've diverted some of their work somewhere else. Maintenance is happy, operations is upset, but overall the process is better. So when you're siloed in your thinking, you don't actually balance for total productivity. You look to maximize your area of responsibility and you get into these turf wars. And if you've ever been sitting in a room listening to two grown men shout at each other about labor hours or labor costs, you just want to smack both of them, like crack their skulls together and be like, guys, this is the best thing for the company. It doesn't matter if it shifted the balance a little bit from what it has been. This is what's best for the company, which is why you need top management behind you, because you need someone who's higher than both of them to step in and say, we're going to do what's best for the company. So attitudes towards customers, voice of the customer is important. There's professional treatment. They're courteous and responsive. They're empathetic and respectful. That's pretty standard of what we should be seeing. The quality of a product is according to the customer requirements and needs. So this is really focused, again, that customer driven. Process management is focused on error and defect prevention instead of error and defect detention. It is building quality in instead of inspecting defects out. I'm going to say that again. It is building quality in instead of detecting and inspecting defects out. Ultimately, that's cheapest for the company. Ultimately, that's best for the customer. Initially, it slows everything down. Because if you have been in a process where you just inspect out rejects and you rework them, and now you go to building quality in so you don't have a reject in the first place, what happens to your attack time? Does it go up or down? Initially. Up. Initially, it goes up. Initially, it's going to slow the process down, which is, again, one of the reasons if you don't have that long-term focus, people are going to say, oh, lean doesn't work. They made all these changes and it slowed us down. It probably means it is going to work. It probably means you had a lot of issues that needed to be rebalanced so that you get it right out the door the very first time, and you don't have to rework. And that rework cost goes to zero. And so those labor hours, those machine hours, that delay to customers completely goes away. But if I'm only caring about Leo's operation time, yeah, his time might have gone up. It's another example of that total productivity picture. Am I looking for the company as a whole to win, or am I looking for me to win? That's a difference in thinking, which is why thinking comes first. So improvement strategy, again, not that crisis management or managing by fear, continuous process improvement. Always continuous process improvement. So how do these organizations look? Yeah, go ahead.
How do you get out of crisis management and do continuous if you're always fighting crisis?
So this is where I said resource allocation. Sometimes the reason you're perpetually in crisis management is because you're too short-staffed. When you have the people whose job description includes continuous improvement stepping in to be a team lead because someone called out sick, or having to follow up and follow up and follow up with maintenance because they're not getting your line back up and running, like when your job description is supposed to include continuous improvement and you can't ever get to that part of your job because you're always running around like a chicken with its head cut off, trying to do everything else, that's a resource issue. You're missing a person because there's problems that need to be solved. That is a fact. But you're eliminating, you're saying, oh yeah, we have people who do continuous improvement as part of their job description. See, I can show it to you in their job description. But functionally, it's not happening. So a lot of times it's a resource issue where if you had two Leos and one Leo focused on continuous improvement and one Leo does what you do right now, you would net 40 hours a week of continuous improvement, right? Because it's not that you're wasting time, it's that your time is not being allocated to those activities that you could be doing. Does that make sense? That's a real hard sell, which is why gaining productivity through efficiency and improved quality is really helpful. Because maybe I don't need a resource if maintenance does their job. Maybe I don't need another resource if my operators are fully trained and they're not generating mistakes all the time. Maybe I don't need a resource if our equipment is PM'd so we're not constantly breaking down. But it's we're all behind you, Leo. You can do it. But if you look at all the things, if you mapped out all of the hours, and we're just going to pick on him since we already are. If you mapped out all of the hours of his day that were not doing his job description, but were firefighting the crisis of the moment. And then you root cause solved all of those and actually change the system. You don't need a second Leo. Leo can now do that part of his job, right? So this is where it's what hill do they want to die on? You know, you can add another resource so that Leo can keep doing what he's doing and someone else can work on continuous improvement. Or we can actually continuously improve, and then Leo has time and space to keep that going because he's not doing as much firefighting as he was doing. But it's got to come from somewhere. You can't say no to everything. I was on a meeting over Zoom, and my husband was driving. I was riding in the car on this Zoom meeting, and it ended, and he was like, "Who was that person who just said no to everything?" I was like, I told him the name of the person and what department they worked in. He was like, "Yeah, they're not easy to work with, are they? Never met the person, knows nothing about their job description, no, just listened to them in one meeting and heard them say no to absolutely every solution someone put forward. And the person only gave back why it wouldn't work." How many people have been in a meeting with that type of person? Okay, truth. How many people are that type of person? Do I have any like cynics in here who are just like, that won't work?
It's also somewhat good to have that type of person that comes to situations.
So devil's advocate is not the same as cynic. Helping to brainstorm past the reality of what's difficult, to be like, okay, but people aren't going to want to do that just because you say so. What are we changing so that people want to do that? That's helpful, because management can get very lofty. All of our operators will improve their quality. How? Why? What's changing between what's happening today and this moment when all the operators have improved their quality? Are you paying them more? Are you showing them recognition? Are you training them better? Are you changing the job requirements? Like, what are you doing? You don't get from here to here just on happy thoughts. So that is valuable. But I call that more like devil's advocate, kind of like pushing through the kind of lofty idealism to reality. Cynic is cynical. Like it's impossible. Can't happen. Go ahead.
So when I think of that situation, in my mind always goes to this kind of person that's been doing it 30 years, and they've seen me try to do it 15 years ago and they couldn't.
So I've worked with those individuals who have been there for 30 years and always can say, we tried that in 1987 and Q2 and it failed. And like, that's the reason why they won't ever try it again. I've worked with that person. Sometimes you're in a position where you can circumvent those people and just move forward without them, because needing buy-in doesn't mean that I need to convince every Mr. Grumpy Pants that I'm right. Sometimes they just need to go along with the flow or stay out of the way. But there are times that I do need buy-in, because if the thing that I'm asking to change is that person's responsibility and that's their attitude, nothing's going to change, right? So like there are times where, yes, you're going to have to like get that person to see it from a different perspective, and that's going to be really hard. There are other times where you can be like, okay, Hunter, thanks for that feedback. So how are we going to do this, people? And you just kind of leave Hunter alone to be grumpy over there. Hunter's actually like one of the least grumpy people I know. So, but yeah, so there are times when we say like get buy-in, that's not 100%. Consensus is not 100%. Consensus is majority, really. You have a workable, you can get around the obstructionists. Because if Austin just doesn't care and wants to be left alone, and it doesn't directly affect Austin, then I'm not going to fight that battle today. I'm going to keep myself moving forward. If Austin is the linchpin of the process and he's not on board, I'm going to find out like how he likes his coffee and what's his favorite cookie. And I'm going to be having conversations, kind of stroking his ego a little bit. Austin, you've got so much wisdom to give. It would be really valuable if you can be a part of this process. 3D print toys for his kids. Like, yeah, you sweet talk these people. You like butter them up and convince them to get on your side. So sometimes that's what it takes. I was doing a big change within my area. I bought them lunch every day for 2 weeks straight because that's when we did the training. I needed the training in. The only time I could get it done was either overtime or lunchtime. And I asked my boss, I said, which do you want to pay for, overtime or lunches? And he said lunches. I'm like, okay. So I bought them lunch every day for 2 weeks straight, and we got the training done. That was the only way it was going to happen. So sometimes you got to like butter people up. Sometimes you got to, kind of prepare the way so that you can get movement in the direction you need to go. And sometimes you need to be willing to know that you're right and they're wrong, but they're not going to impede you. So just keep going. Because I'm sure I might have 1 or 2 people in this room who are that, like they want to win over everyone. They want everyone to agree with them. And sometimes you can't. You just keep going. So, flattened hierarchies. If you're going to be closer to the customer, you can't have 8 million layers of management. You might have noticed that USI is collecting vice presidents like their Pokemon Go. Catch them all. We're doing the opposite right now, right? We're adding layers. We're getting the decision makers further and further away from the stakeholders. That is the opposite direction. Risk taking. There needs to be a tolerance of mistakes, especially if they were done with the heart of improvement. This is not the same as rejects. This isn't the same as defects. This is saying, so Maggie Bolin over at Toyota has been working on the project and she needed to shut the line down to actually implement it. She has met with everyone. She has simulated it. She has tried it out every possible way she can, short of shutting the line down. It took her 4 months to get permission to shut the line down. It worked. She had done her job really well. But for 4 months, she was just convincing people to let her do the trial run to make sure it would work before they switched over to the new method. 4 months of wasting time, 4 months that they didn't have that improvement. That's stupid. And that's Toyota. Remember the Toyota production system? Yeah. In reality, shutting down the line is equated to a dollar amount per minute. But you couldn't get the change unless you were willing to try. And they weren't willing to try for like 4 months. So, and that's Toyota. There's a silver lining. I love it. Okay, so effective communication, this is what we're going to talk about next. Whether it's internal marketing, like getting everybody on board, making sure everybody knows what the game plan is, having a consistency of message that everybody's saying the same thing. The worst thing, okay, do you remember when we went D1 and everyone was talking about how we didn't want to go D1, but they made us anyway? Like, that's not good internal marketing. That's not a consistent message because you have our president talking about what a great thing it is, and every single other person on campus saying it's terrible. Like, very inconsistent. All levels of management, whether it was faculty, staff, students, alumni, everybody was saying that we shouldn't have done it, while the president is going on interviews talking about how amazing it is and how happy the campus is. Okay, but I've actually watched him at basketball. I've gone to a couple basketball games this year. And I've watched him and he's actually like really into it. Like he actually watches the game.
In my mind, I'm like, that should be the most hardworking, busiest, never leaves his office ever person. Because you can look his salary up online. It does not suck.
No, okay, but you're getting confused about organizational structures in higher education. His role is a political role. The provost is what you're thinking of. Our provost is,
I always see him outside.
that's his job. He is a kissing baby, high-fiving, handshaking, smiling person. But he's also the person that goes to the state house and says, give us more money. And he's pretty effectual at that. It's all about personality, right? The provost is the one that's actually steering the ship. So it's like having a captain and an admiral on the same boat. The admiral outranks him, but is ineffectual. The captain's the one steering the ship. The provost is the captain. And everything that's said is actually lived out by leadership. So we have supportive board of directors. We have all of our levels of employees having buy-in, and we measure the right things. You measure the things that actually align to the things that you want to change. So if you're trying to change first time quality, you don't measure out the door quality. Those aren't the same. It's a different process to do that because you can rework something a billion times over, especially at Berry. Just melt it down again, throw it back into the extruder, right? So out the door quality is a totally different metric than right the first time quality. Total output is a different metric than machine availability. Machine availability means your maintenance team is doing their job right and you can run anytime you need to. Productivity is just how much you actually did run. Those aren't the same metrics. Measure what you're actually trying to improve and then make it visible. No back room, hidden information. Nobody actually knows if they're on target. This is another thing that I see at actually really pretty good organizations that have a ways to go. The mindset of, well, if the employees know that they're doing a good job and we're above target, they'll stop trying so hard. That's not true. It's been proven to not be true. The majority of people, if they know they're doing well, want to keep doing well. It is the individual with a 4.0 that really doesn't want a B+. The individual with a 3.2 is okay with a B+, right? People that are doing well want to keep doing well. You don't want to see the numbers go down. So this idea that, oh, if we put out that we've actually met our goal, everybody's going to slack off. That's not true. Okay, maybe there's someone, but you know what? They're probably slacking off now and other people are picking up the slack. The majority of people, if you're doing well, they want to maintain that level. And reward the employees because they're the ones doing the work. They should get the benefit from this. So how do we know how we're doing? How can we communicate that information? Well, you need operational feedback systems, right? You need places where you're collecting that data and collecting input. That includes input from your employees. Are you doing a good job? And that's not a suggestion box where you put things and delete them, or an electronic suggestion box that goes to a spam location that nobody ever reads. Like, this is actual real feedback. A lot of that's going to come from middle management. A lot of that's going to come from team leads, right? People who are working with frontline workers. Those are the people who are going to have the best pulse. So if Carson says, look, the people on the line are really demoralized, he's the best one to know. If upper management is like, no, they're fine. We gave them coffee mugs. Like, again, that's that idealism that's not real. And Tyler, that's where it is. It's good to push back. It's good to be like, yeah, no, nobody cared about your coffee mug. Nobody cares about the new slogan. Like they're still doing mandatory overtime every weekend for a year and they just want to be home with their families. Like that's realism, that's feedback they need to hear, operational feedback. Surveys, focus groups, field experiments, that's all on collecting data from customers, because if you're going to be customer driven, you need to hear from them. How many of you are likely to put on a review for something that you thought was great? You loved it. Maybe. You might consider it. Like if you're really excited about it, you might consider it. How many of you are going to put out a review for something that meets expectations? How many of you would put out a review for something that was terrible? Yeah, we give negative feedback. Unsolicited feedback is mostly negative. So you have to pursue customer feedback if you want a realistic picture, because all of the times that you are meeting expectations are going to go completely unnoticed. You'll get a couple really high, you'll get a lot of really low. You don't get anything in the middle. It's not a representative sample. So if you want feedback from customers, you're going to have to go find it. And so there's a couple different ways, and your textbook goes through a couple different tools for finding it. Now, for your projects, you're going to look at a problem that's doable to you, right? That's a big issue of your project's scope. But if you are working in industry and someone's getting really insistent that you need to improve something, a lean Six Sigma response to that will be, how does that impact the customer? You need to be able to draw a straight line from the improvement you're doing to how that impacts the customer. Now, if it lowers cost, if it increases quality, if it decreases cycle time, those all impact the customer, right?
How does lowering the cost affect the customer?
No, but as your prices increase, as your costs increase, you can hold their cost steady. If you've lowered operational costs, you don't have to pass on an increase in cost to you directly to the customer to make up for it, because you've gotten more efficient. Good question. So the feedback systems, they give you a couple different examples for how to do that, but that feedback system comes from the idea of having information coming back from the customers. Now, here's a place where we kind of derive, and the Kano model is mentioned a couple times in the certification exam materials, so I wanted to make sure that I showed this example from the beginning. The Kano model is actually from marketing. It's not like a lean or quality tool, although it's about quality, because what it's really about is satisfaction, and it's about creating this exciting quality. And this line right here, expected quality, that's what we were talking about, right? When it meets expectations, crickets. Nobody talks about it. You got what you paid for, right? When you're unsatisfied, you'll definitely report that. But how do you keep your market share or increase your market share? You need exciting quality. You're exceeding expectations. And that can happen a lot of different ways. Exceeding expectations can be creating something that the customer doesn't even know they need until you tell them that they need it. That's raising their expectations, delighting the customer. It could be performing so well that people have a memorable experience. So my husband and I went to Vegas for the first time when he had come back from his first deployment to Iraq, the first of 3. And the first time he came back from Iraq, it was right around our wedding anniversary. We had never been to Vegas before. We were living in Colorado Springs, and so it was really cheap and close. So that's why we chose it. I paid for the hotel and airfare on Priceline back when you could still like name your own price, and my bid was accepted. We were paying like next to nothing for this hotel room. We get there at midnight, And they're like, first time to Vegas? We're like, yes. They're like, oh, that's great. They're like, what brings you here? We're like, oh, it's our anniversary. And they're like, oh, that's fantastic. I'm like, yeah, it's really special because he just got back from Iraq. The woman says, wait a minute. And she starts typing like she's writing a novel. And she's like, okay, we're going to put you in this other room. So instead of my cheap, like, I think $45 a night Priceline room, we ended up in the concierge tower, the Venezia Tower at the Venetian Hotel. This is the private tower that everyone has their own butler assigned to them. This was bigger than our New York apartment. It had 2 levels. It had a baby grand piano, and the doors opened up to a plunge pool. I have never in my life stayed in as nice of a hotel as this. And we spent $46 a night because of good customer service. I will probably, those will probably be the last story I tell before I die. And this happened when I was still in my 20s. I am no longer in my 20s. It was a memorable experience. That's how good that exciting level of quality was. When we think about customer expectations, meeting expectations does not add competitive pressure. It does not add a competitive edge. It does not expand your market share. If you think of it in terms of grades, it's like a C. A C is like meets expectations. It's that top of the bell curve. That's it. Now, we didn't get through it completely, but I know I'm out of time, so we're going to stop here. There is no quiz on Wednesday, but I am going to try to get through the rest of this lecture and the next lecture that was already planned. We'll see how that goes. But in the meantime, be thinking about your projects, because that's what we're going to talk about a week from today. Be thinking about your projects. And have a great day. Happy Monday, everybody. Why can't I get there? Stop recording.